Welcome to the Sustainability Nugget podcast. I am Rarasu Maraibi.
And I'm Tosin Folorunsho.
On this podcast, we learn about sustainability by discussing various related topics while focusing on three pillars: the economy, the society, and the environment.
Hello everyone, welcome again to Sustainability Nuggets podcast. It's Tosin here again today, and I have a very awesome guest with us today. Her name is Kestrel Jenkins, and she is the host and producer of Conscious Chatter. Conscious Chatter is a leading podcast that reimagines the narrative around sustainability, questions conscious consumerism, and works to deconstruct how oppressive systems impact the sustainable fashion space. She launched Conscious Chatter 7 years ago, and it has been downloaded over 1 million times and has listeners across 100 plus countries. It continues to be utilized as a tool in higher education classrooms as well. Kestrel believes in approaching fashion issues through a multi-stakeholder approach while contextualizing and understanding the root causes of the industry's current state. Our unique storytelling style has led to speaking engagements around the world, and she has even hosted and moderated events in the Netherlands, Germany, and all across the United States. Kestrel, thank you for joining us today. It's exciting to have you here, definitely.
Thank you so much, Tosin. I'm so happy to be able to chat with you.
Thank you. So I found out about your podcast late last year, and for me, it was like, I didn't realize this resource has been existing for so long. Like I'm glad that I stumbled upon it when I got introduced to you, and it's been a great resource for me, despite the fact that I'm also, passionate about sustainable fashion and the issues around fashion, and I've been trying to learn on my own for about 10 years now. It's awesome that you've been doing this for 7 years and have like this whole, your podcast is like a library of resources to me, really. So I find it really inspiring. So can you tell us briefly about your story, how and why you started Conscious Chatter?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thank you for listening. And I feel like I have so much gratitude for my guests because they really bring the knowledge, But to take you back a little bit, I guess I've always been someone who loves fashion. Since I was a kid, like I was 3 years old, and people would come to our house, and my parents tell stories about how I would go upstairs and change my outfit multiple times just to like come down and be like, see this outfit? Did you see this look?
Oh, that's good.
And so I always have had like just an affinity of clothing and to putting together outfits. But for some reason, I had it in my mind that I shouldn't study fashion at university because I had been kind of, trained through society that fashion wasn't like academic enough. And so I almost just didn't even open that door in my mind as an option. So when I went to school, I studied international journalism and global studies. And then after my studies, I was really interested in the idea of fair trade. And so I was at home in the Midwest, living with my parents, trying to figure out my next move, and was very grateful for that opportunity. And my mom got a catalog from a company called Fair Indigo. And it was like this group of people who used to work at Land's End that left and started a company that was like, quote unquote, fair trade fashion. And the style was like not my aesthetic at all, full disclosure. But the idea was really incredible. And I thought, wow, I don't really know enough about like what's really happening behind the scenes in fashion. And so I just got really obsessed with this idea. I started researching, and I discovered People Tree, which is a company based in London. They also have been kind of based in Japan, back and forth over the years. And they call themselves the pioneers in fair trade fashion. And so I thought, okay, I need to somehow work with them. It was like the only brand out there that I could find that felt like it resonated with my interests.
Mm.
And so I started emailing them
And
and I
what
would
year
email
was
them.
this?
Let's see. This is probably like 14 years ago, maybe.
Wow.
13 or 14 years ago. I'm really aging myself here. And so I would email and I would get no response. And I would literally email like every week. And then every once in a while, they would pop in and say, okay, we heard your email. Like, we'll let you know. And one day the PR manager reached out and said, hey, can you pop by the office for an interview? They're in London. And I was like, I can't pop by the office, but I can jump on a call. And then I ended up getting the opportunity to go to London for 6 months and work with PeopleTree. And that was, I guess, my like crash course in the industry to just kind of see what's really going on. I got to work with Safia Mini, the founder, a bit on and off. And from that point on, I just have always wanted to work in this world in some capacity. And so I went down lots of different tangents, was in New York for a while, ended up on the West Coast, and started a podcast now about 7 years ago, and was really just wanting to, dive deeper. And also my thing has always been, how do we get this conversation to more of like a mainstream audience, to just everyday people? Because I think sustainability in its origins as like a movement has been very exclusive and often like leaves out a lot of folks. And so that's always been kind of a top priority to me, but definitely my guests have been like my educators, I feel like. So I owe a lot to everyone who's joined me and helped me discover different kind of facets of sustainability over the years.
That's awesome. So I had a list of questions for you today. And the first is really about fast fashion, because I think that's what's on the media now. That's what everybody's talking about. And there's constantly the argument about, okay, this has made clothing accessible to people, to every kind of person. But then there's also the issue with the demise of quality clothing. So what's your take on that? How do you think the rise of fast fashion has, what's the connection between the rise of fast fashion and the demise of quality clothing? And does that even matter?
Yeah, definitely. I know it is really tricky. And when you think about it, I feel like in today's world, fast fashion is becoming so demonized. It's like, if someone says fast fashion, I was just talking with a friend of mine, Brittany, who runs a sustainable fashion forum the other day. And she was saying like, every time she posts about fast fashion, suddenly the comment section just goes off. Like people have such a very intense response to it, like kind of pro or con, or, it's very emotionally charged.
Right.
And it's interesting how it's become that way, but it does remind you of how our clothing is so, interconnected with our personal self, with, how we represent ourselves, who we are. It's part of our identity. So you can kind of see how that comes through in those debates. But I think it's important to think back to like the origins of fast fashion and how when it first hit the market, it was celebrated in a sense.
Right.
It was a way to, they talk about like the democratization of fashion. They talk about how it was, opening fashion to more socioeconomic folks across different socioeconomic statuses. It was an opportunity for more people to access fashion. So it wasn't just this kind of, thing that lived on runways and was only for the elite and the folks with lots of money. Right. And so I like that aspect, of course, of what it stands for. But unfortunately, behind the scenes, what was actually happening in order to push those prices so low meant that there was a lot of, harsh things happening to the folks in the supply chain and then also to the environment. And so it's a tricky conversation, but like you said, definitely fed to, I guess, this stage where we've considered our clothes as disposable. Like we've suddenly come to this place where we've aligned garments with disposability, or with being okay with just wearing something one time and then tossing it in the trash. And that is pretty outstanding and like overwhelming to realize when you think back just like, 20, 30, 40 years, that is not how clothing was viewed. It was something that you took care of. It was something that you handed down. It was something that you mended when something broke. And you didn't have so many garments. You had fewer garments and you really took care of them. And so we are in this interesting stage where we've really, I feel like, created a disconnect in our relationship with our garments, which is really detrimental to, I think, our happiness in the end, as well as the happiness of the planet and people who are in the supply chain, et cetera, et cetera. So I think it's really important for us to try to, reconnect with the clothing we have, actually think about it as something that has value. So we can move forward in a better direction, because it's like a cringe to think, it's so cringeworthy to think about, but the amount of trash that's piling up that has clothing intermixed inside of it is like,
it's insane.
It's astounding. But it happens when you devalue the price of something, we tend to devalue it in how we just value it as an item. So if we think we can buy a t-shirt for $5, we're not going to value it. It's like the same price as a latte, like how is that even possible? And we've devalued the fact that fashion is an art form. I know you're a designer, you understand this. It's like when you create a garment, it's not a simple process.
No,
like it takes so many different steps, and it's an art form.
Yeah, definitely. So when I was preparing for this recording this morning, I kept thinking about just the fast fashion. And for me, I learned about fast fashion when I just started out as a designer. And this was before I started knowing about brands like Fashion Over, H&M. The only brand I really knew then was Zara. And I actually loved Zara's business model, because as you mentioned, it was like, this is opening up people to more people with lower, different levels of socioeconomic status to accessible clothing, stylish clothing. And they also,
I was obsessed with Zara. I had an era, like I was living in Spain, and so it was like Zara was everywhere. And it was like, it was so fun to go there and see all these new things and all these things that were so exciting and fresh and looked like they were just on the runway, and then I could access them.
Right. Yeah, that's how it was for me at first. But then I think what happens is when there's no limits to growth, when we just keep like going towards exponential growth, it goes off to the extreme, and there will always be someone who will be on the receiving end for that supposed growth, which I think is what has happened with fast fashion. And now we've moved on to to Shein becoming the behemoth of the industry. So what do you think about Shein's recent pop-up stores? Now that I mentioned Shein, they started as an online only consumer brand, clothing brand, and now they've grown to having pop-up stores around. And I think the first time I learned about the pop-up stores was on the Garment Workers Center Instagram page. And it was concerning for me, and just to see the amount of people going there, which it's like, when did we get to this stage where we do not value our clothing anymore? And so people supposedly think like this brings them happiness, the access to having more clothes. But for me, I question if that's really true, because when you think about when we had lesser clothing, you knew just what you had to wear for a special occasion. You knew what you needed to wear to maybe a religious event, for example. or you knew what to wear to work and what to wear to a casual gathering. But now it's like you have this rows, hangers of clothing hanged in your closet, and you're still like, I don't know what to wear.
I have nothing
And
to
then,
wear.
yeah, I have nothing to wear. And the next thing is, oh, well, I'm just gonna look online right now and check for what I need to wear to this birthday party. And then there's always something to wear to every event. It's yeah. Yes. So with Shein, what's your take on Shein? And I know since they've come under fire, they're like the major fast fashion brand that is under scrutiny. And they've recently they started a Shein exchange program. I don't know if you do you know about that?
Only a little bit about it, yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting also because they're not very transparent, so it's just really hard to find stuff about them. But what's your take on pop-up now that they have like actual physical locations where they do pop-up stores? How do you think that's either complicating the issues around fast fashion?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's overwhelming, like you kind of mentioned. And I think it also is such an indicator of how pervasive Shein is and how really smart they are as like a business in a capitalistic world.
Yep.
I was actually just talking to someone about this the other day, but I have a really wild Shein story myself. So last year I was at a thrift store and I found this like sweater vest. And I was like, oh, okay, it fits well. I really like it. I think I'll wear it a lot. And I looked for the tag in it and I couldn't find a tag anywhere. There was no tag. So I bought it, took it home, washed it. I went to put it on to wear it. And there was like this scratchy tag in the side. And I'm like, oh, wait, there is a tag. So I find the tag and it's Shein.
Ooh.
And I was like, are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? Like, I'm someone who is like so aware and I'm trying so hard and I'm, really asking so many questions before I make a purchase. And I just bought a Shein top. And I was like so disgusted and I felt so guilty. And then once I kind of worked through that, I got to the other side. I was like, all right, well, I'm going to just wear this thing to shreds. Like I'm going to wear it as much as possible because I have it. And I have done that. But I think it just shows you that they are literally everywhere. Like even if you're trying to keep them out of your wardrobe, they will find a way to like manipulate their way in.
Yeah.
And it just shows how they have so many garments out there now. They have so many styles. Like they're literally everywhere. Insane, they flooded the secondhand market. So, so it's really hard to escape having them in your closet. And so for me, thinking about Shein's impact really makes me think about how we need to be so creative as an industry when it comes to sustainability to be able to compete with that, because they are going to do everything they can to sneak into your wardrobe and to entice you by all of the different things that they do. And obviously, like we can see by the waves of people that are at these pop-ups that people are enticed by what they're doing. And so marketing from a sustainability lens, we just have to be more creative. We have to be more like ahead of the curve, because otherwise like brands like Shein are going to continue to take over.
Yeah. It's interesting you brought up the story about the buying a sweater. So from a thrift store, I also had the same experience. And I was telling my co-host, we have an episode recorded about fast fashion, and I told her, well, I went to Goodwill one day and I saw a lot of Shein clothing, and she was like, wait, Shein at the secondhand market at the thrift store? I said yes, because that's what happens when when you're producing about 2,000 garments in a week.
Mm-hmm.
That's how many garments they keep launching and putting on their online stores. And so we tell people buy secondhand, but we're going to secondhand to buy shit.
Yeah. And that's like, the thing is nowadays, because of the way the fast fashion has infiltrated the market, things are coming into our possession and leaving our possession so quickly that it's like whatever you want that's a new like fast fashion item, probably you can already find it on a secondhand platform. or in a thrift store. Like you can already find it there, which is I feel like just fueling our addiction to shopping, which is the big issue here, right?
Yeah.
The big issue I feel like is overproduction and overconsumption. Like you talked about, we need to slow down, like growth is a huge issue. And so if that's the issue, the way that fast fashion is taken over and is moving its way so quickly into the secondhand market, it's just continuing to speed up the process of how we're buying. It's not slowing us down at all, which is really what we need to be doing, is slowing down how we're consuming.
Right. Very true. So in terms of quality clothing items, and now that we've had this perversion of unsustainable, not clothing with little or not great quality in stores, how are you yourself able to gauge that an item is quality and sustainable? Like what's your own definition? Yeah.
It's a great question. And I think it is somewhat personal because all of us have certain fabrics that maybe feel better on our bodies, or, certain aesthetics and styles and all these things. But I think for me, the top two priorities are fabric and fit. And so for me, I tend to try to avoid synthetics nowadays. I used to be open to it, but the more and more information that comes out about how toxic synthetics are and how scary they are for us and our health, I just kind of avoid them. There was a study that was done in Canada recently, and it came out that several of these Shein garments had really high levels of lead in them, and they were kids' garments. They were garments for children. So I think that there's a lot of layers there when it comes to synthetics, and there's a lot that we can't understand.
Let's address lead and why that should be concerning. So what's the issue with lead? I want to get people to really understand why this is an issue.
There's so many issues, but it's concerning for bodily function, for overall health. It's concerning for growth and how your body is growing. It is concerning because it can influence cancer growth. There's all of these things that are not positive about it. And not only was lead found, but there are also phthalates, high levels of phthalates and PFAs. So those are really concerning for a multitude of reasons, reproductive health. It can impact. There's so many things that these chemicals, these man-made chemicals, continue to uncover the toxicity levels of it.
Yeah.
And I think it's been for a long time where we couldn't find any information from the scientific community about what actually is in our garments. And now finally, I feel like there's kind of this massive wave of information that's finally rolling in from the scientific community that's saying look, this is this can't happen. I mean, we're seeing it from a regulatory level now. All of a sudden, California has a law that went into place that in 2025, fashion brands cannot sell products that have been sprayed by PFAs, and which is often in DWR products. And then New York just put a law into place that by the end of this year, by the end of 2023, no fashion brands there can sell products that are containing PFAs. So we're finally seeing kind of the science come forward, which is leading to regulation, which I think is positive. But I think it's also going to be really tricky to see how that regulation actually gets enforced, because a lot of times this is happening on fabrics before they arrive to the States. And then it's going to be really tricky to regulate.
I just quickly want to address what PFAs are. PFAs are they're also known as forever chemicals, and the issue is that they are endocrine disruptors, so they can disrupt the nervous system, cause brain damage, and also make people have high risk of getting cancers. So that's why they are really dangerous. So imagine that we're putting this on our body every time. My first experience with toxic clothing was when I was in college, like 2011, 2012. I had this black sweater that I think was made with synthetic wool. I really loved, like, that was one of my favorite sweater. I always loved turtlenecks, and so that would be my go-to when it was cold. But then I noticed every time I wore it, because I have a sensitive skin, my eczema increased, like especially around my joints, my neck area, because it's turtleneck, and also my elbow joints. And for a while I didn't really realize, oh wait, it's actually this sweater that's adding to, like, my body would become so itchy every time I put on that sweater. And then I went to look into, okay, what's in clothing and why do some clothes make you itch? And that's when I started realizing, well, this clothing might have been treated with this kind of chemicals that are harmful. That really made me start thinking about what I wear, like what kind of clothing I put on. Unfortunately, I came to hate that sweater because I just can't have that on my body. I also, while listening to your podcast about healthy clothing, I remember your guest, I can't remember her name, but your guest mentioned
Sarah Daniel.
Sarah, yes. She mentioned that our skin, I don't know if it was her or you that mentioned that our skin is the largest organ on our body. And so if you consider the fact
and the
that,
most absorptive.
yes, so that's like your skin is the entryway. That's the entryway for anything coming into your body apart from your mouth, because it has that's the first point of access. And so we're putting on this clothing, not realizing things that are in them. But how do we tell people, like, what do people look for when they're shopping for clothing? How can people tell that what chemicals these are made from?
I think it's so tricky because, like, one of the big issues is plastic or fossil fuels in fashion, right? But that can be in so many different stages of the process. It could be in the fiber, like in a polyester nylon material. It could be in the dyes. It could be in finishing treatments. It could be in so many aspects. So it is really tricky. I think a good place to start is to search for, natural fibers, like cottons or or that kind of thing, linens. I think that's a good place to start. But then again, like, the dyes can be toxic, like the finishes that are on a natural fiber can be as well. So I think one of the key aspects of this is to try to slow down our consumption, because then you have more time to really think about what you want and what you need, and to ask more questions. Because I think the way that we've been programmed to think that we shop, it's like you get an email that says you need this to be more cool, right? So you buy it, and like you do it right then, and you feel like you have to do it in that moment, or it's going to be gone, right? Because they've told you it's almost gone.
Yeah.
And so there's always that like scarcity mindset, and we need to get ourselves out of that sort of momentum of shopping in order to have enough time to think about what you really need, to be able to ask questions to the brand, to be able to kind of go through those steps. Because even someone like me who works in this industry, I've been in this space for, 15 years, like, it's challenging when you're trying to find something that meets a lot of these criteria. It's not really simple. And it's just not. And so I think the only way that we tackle that is by slowing down the way we're shopping.
Right. And what the challenge I've had with sustainable clothing brands, I support them, because I also, I want to end up starting a fashion brand. I want it to be sustainable. But then I noticed that it's always, there would always be the point where you have to choose between quality and price. And so with like organic cotton materials, for example, they're considerably more expensive than the usual just regular clothing that we have. So you're right about pausing on what we need to buy. For me, it's like, oh, I really want to have this nice clothing, but I want it to be good and healthy for me. I want to make sure that it's good for my body. But then I check the price. I'm like, that's not in my budget right now. So let's just pause on this. And
Yeah.
hopefully, yeah. And then with my clothing, I I think about maybe if I wear this more often, like washing would probably help remove some of the chemicals. Hopefully, just
Mhm.
trying to think about ways you can manage what you have right now instead of adding on more stuff. And
Definitely.
yeah, I've noticed with Shein products because so I got a gift from my sister-in-law. I got a Shein gift card from my sister-in-law, and I was like, oh, thank you. But I don't shop from this brand. But then I got clothing from there because I just did want. I do appreciate the gift. So I bought the clothing and they arrived, and just the smell
Mm.
was concerning to me. I was like, why should clothing smell like this? This is not right.
It's such a good point. And that's like what was the impetus for Patagonia to finally start like changing the way that they were doing business back in like the 80s or something, because they would get their shipments in from overseas, and folks that were working in their warehouse would complain about having headaches and like not feeling well, and there would be this like overwhelming smell attached to it.
Wow.
And then they started looking into it and started realizing, oh wait, like there's all these chemicals that they're adding to our clothes or that are part of this process. And that was when Yvon Chouinard was like, wait, we need to figure out what's going on and change this. And of course, like they're not perfect, like no brand is perfect, but they're someone who I think has been trying to shift the reality of the industry.
Right. Yeah. What would be your call to action for? I mean, you've given some action points just while answering the questions, but if there's something you always a starting point for people who are just learning about sustainable fashion and the issue to fashion, what would you recommend as a starting point, and how can we grow that into collective action?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I love this question. I always ask it on my show too. And I always want to know what people think. So I think what's top of mind for me right now from an individual level is thinking about trying to only buy 5 garments per year. So I don't know
Oh,
if
wow.
you, I don't know if you've
Okay.
seen, but there's a new study that came out from the Hot or Cool Institute in Berlin. And there's a lot of information in there, but one of the key findings was in order to ensure we stay in line with the Paris Agreement, like to keep the temperature rise below like 1.5 degrees Celsius, right?
Yeah.
We can each buy 5 garments a year. If you don't change anything else in the way that you're kind of taking care of your clothes or
Really?
mending or different things like that. And at first, 5 garments might seem like, oh, 5 garments is only 5 things. Like, that's not enough. I need more. But then when you think about it, it's like you could buy at least 1 garment per season, or you could buy almost like 1 garment every other month. Or, I think for me, it feels really important that we finally have a target, because I think when we actually have a number, it's more powerful to allow us to think about how we can integrate that into our life. Because for a long time, it's been like, buy less, buy better, and all these like ideas, which I think are important and valuable to send the message. But we haven't like had someone say, here's your number, like your target is 5 garments per year. And maybe the first year you buy 15, fine. But like, if you're thinking about that, I think that allows us to be more, mindful and pay attention to what we're buying. Then I think from a collective level, I think it's really important to continue to think about how we can come together to advocate for legislative change.
Yep.
I'm in a place where I'm so optimistic finally about fashion legislation. The fashion industry is notorious for being one of the most underregulated industries across the board, especially in the US. And for example, you look at SB 62, the Garment Worker Protection Act that went into place. And that happened because of garment workers leading the movement and a bunch of folks getting on board with it, sharing it across social media, people calling their representatives to try to advocate for it. And the law went into effect and it removed the piece rate in LA and did lots of other kind of layers in the bill. But it's an example of what can happen. And I think it's a really exciting time because we are seeing all this legislation come through. And so as a collective effort, like we all have to pay attention to these bills and do what we can to continue to push them forward. Because I know regulation is not going to change everything, but it's one of those levers that I think we need to move forward in a less harmful way.
You're very right about regulations. And okay, let's start with the buying 5 clothing items per year first. Last year I joined this challenge by Rebecca World on Instagram. It was the no buy challenge, and I think it went from September until I think it was throughout the summer. Yeah, so I think I started in August until September. And it was interesting because it challenged me to finally take styling seriously. So as much as I've always loved fashion, I was more of the design person. So I didn't necessarily dress up much. I always was like, I just need to make this clothing and then I'll be proud of seeing people wear what I made. That was kind of the way I was. And so most people didn't even realize that, oh, she makes clothing, or oh, she likes fashion. But yeah, so when I just started stepping back from buying so many clothing and just thinking about the whole waste, because it was the waste for me that actually got me into sustainable fashion. Just there's too much. This should not be happening. Why are we throwing so many things away? And for me, that made me get creative. Like, okay, so how can I style this piece of skirt, wear it multiple times without it looking like I only have one skirt in the whole world, and still trying to look good. Yeah, so it's I think it can be a start. If I would say that's a great goal to achieve. But I imagine people be like, 5 clothing items. I would start with probably doing like a clothing fast, or clothing like a buying fast, sort of, to ease yourself into the process. And then I also thought about doing a clothing audit. Like we keep adding on so much stuff thinking we don't have clothing, when we actually don't even check. There's some clothing that for 2 years now I haven't actually worn them, and it's like, okay, so what do I do with this? Should I give it out or just find a way to wear it? Sometimes that's what I do when I see I haven't worn this clothing in a while. I decide, okay, I'm going to wear this today, and then I look up how to style this particular clothing or something. So yeah, I would say for me personally, I would recommend like doing the clothing audits. Check all the clothing items that you have. Find some time to do it, like count how many jackets you have, for example, for winter, or for the cold season. Find how many things you have for summer, and then try seeing how you can style them up and pause on buying for a while. And then if that works, you can now graduate to, okay, so for this year I'm going to plan only 5 only to buy. I mean, it will also be for all year you decide not to buy anything. I want to do that challenge, but not yet. I'm not in that place yet. But we'll see. Like, just not buying any clothing. Like, if I would have a new set of clothing items, it would be what I made. But yeah, I haven't gotten to that space yet.
And I think that's such a good point, that it can be this gradual evolution. You don't have to change, like, on the turn of a dime. Like, I think it's important that it can be a process, because I think too often we put too much pressure on ourselves, and then you like fail, quote unquote, and then you're bummed out, and then you like throw it all out the door and are like, I'm not going to do any of this because I'm too overwhelmed. And it doesn't have to be like that. There's no way that any of us are going to be perfect in this process. And so I think allowing us that grace, and just kind of just like the simple process of being more aware of what you are buying and being more aware of what you have, like you're saying, that can really slow things down and help us kind of build more relationships. Because like we wear less than 20% of the clothes we have. Like, there's so many things that you could have in your wardrobe that maybe you do want to wear, or maybe you don't. And it's important that we look in there. And I love what you said about how you got into the styling. For me, I did like a pledge. Yikes, this is probably like over a decade ago now. And I had this blog, and for the whole year, I pledged to only buy like sustainable brand, fair trade brands at the time. And I had like a very high criteria. So mostly I only bought thrifted things, because in that time, there weren't that many brands out there.
Right.
And I would post an outfit every week. And I got so creative with my styling. It was like I finally found like my styling groove, because I remember having the professor, Timo Rissanen, on my show way back on season 1. And he said, creativity comes from constraints. And it's so true. At least it was in my experience. When you have less, you get really creative and innovative, and you work with the things, you try to use them in different ways, instead of just going back to that mindset of, I have nothing to wear, I'll just go buy something new. It's like, no, what do I have here? And how can I work with it? How can I get creative? And it can be really fun also, if you let it.
That's good. Yeah. I think this also applies to every issue every environmental issue, or just even personal issues that we deal with. When you are constrained to limited options, you are able to get creative with what you have. Like, I remember when I consciously started trying to reduce food waste, before going for another round of grocery shopping, I would check everything I had. Like, it got to a point where I would wait until it looked like my food storage area was actually empty, which it wasn't. That's when I started saying, oh, I have this here. This has been here for a while. Okay, let's make this today. And then I would just come up with recipes. I love cooking as well. So that's like, for me, with clothing and cooking, it's become an art for me. It's like, oh, I can actually whip up this new recipe. No one has made it before, and I'm just combining stuff. A quick example, I remember buying this soup from Olive Garden that I didn't really like, because I bought the wrong one, and then I didn't want to throw it out because I knew I wasn't going to eat that anymore. So I just put it in my refrigerator for a while, and then I had made beans like earlier in that week. And so it just came to me like, oh, wait, you can actually just combine this together. Let's see how it turns out. Sometimes it doesn't turn out great, obviously, but that particular recipe turned out great. So yeah, that's what I love about the whole conversation about climate change, is if we really, really pause and think about the problems. We are humans, we are made to create things. And so the problem can bring inspiration to start creating stuff, to get more creative. And that's really what I love about this, being in this space, really. I wanted to address your points about legislation. So I'm a question that keeps flowing in my head, that has been coming up in my head recently, is, so in places where, in the global south, for example, where most of these items are being made, it's really not easy to implement like legislations, or like, if we're talking about collective actions, for example, like, it's not as easy. I mean, it's not easy here either. Like, there are multiple times some bills get tabled, or it would take like years, decades before it's finally pushed and the bill is passed. But then we also face implementation issues, because a policy can be implemented, but a policy can be, created, but how are we actually implementing it? How do we make it actionable? So what do you think about that? I mean, I'm not asking for like an answer, but it's just more like, this is what I've been thinking about recently. Like, so in places like in Southeast Asian countries where most clothing items are made, or in places like Africa where there's lax regulations when it comes to how things are made. Or even, I was looking into China, for example, like, the reason why Shein is able to grow massively is because they don't really have much regulations that restrict their growth, which, I mean, I'm not against growth, but it's just, let's do things right. So in places like that, what do you think people can do?
No, I think it's such an important question. And it's really important that we're thinking about it. And I think largely listening to folks that are in those areas, because too often, I think the United States specifically makes decisions about how to help the global South without asking the global South or folks that are in the global South what they need, what actually would help, because folks that are in those situations have that information and knowledge. And so I think one of the things you can do is support different organizations that are working within those countries. Like, for example, I think of like the Orr Foundation, who's based in Accra in Ghana, and like, they're on the ground doing work there to try to advocate for change when it comes to like the waste crisis. They call it like the colonial waste crisis. So I think supporting organizations like that. And then like I think of, there's another organization called the Material Library of India. They're doing a lot of really innovative work with materials and like waste materials and reimagining what those can look like. So I think that it does get really tricky from a regulatory lens when things go overseas. Because if you look back to the origins of like how fast fashion started, it started because NAFTA, which that allowed us to, ship, like have everything made overseas for like cheaper prices and then import it back in very easily. And so like, it's that like when we have this global supply chain, regulation is always going to be tricky. Yeah. But I think when the US starts to put some sorts of like restrictions, not necessarily, but like standards in place, hopefully that will gradually work its way through in other areas. But again, I don't necessarily believe that the US should say this is how it should be and then it should trickle down to the global South. I think it needs to be coming from the other side, which is why it's important for us to listen. And, like sustainable fashion events need to involve folks from the global South in the conversation who are on the ground and understand these issues. It's another layer of it, I guess.
Yeah, that's a very important point that you just brought up. I think it's making sure that sustainable fashion really does become inclusive. Where, so when I moved to the US in 2019, it's interesting how I moved here to learn more about climate change and to get a graduate degree in global sustainability, because I felt, oh well, these people are more experienced, or the Western world will have solutions or technology to the problems that I saw in my country. But then I got here and my perspective quickly changed. I was like, wait a minute. Especially with clothing, like the way clothing was just so disposable was concerning. It was like alarming. Like this is not this should not be happening. And so even though in Nigeria we have like a huge $1 million secondhand industry, we still have that culture where you're not just strict. I think things are changing now, because it's the fast fashion is spreading like all over the world, but still there's just that intrinsic culture where that when you don't need a piece of garment anymore, you're not throwing it away. The first thing in your mind is to find someone to give it to. And that's when I started realizing, you know what? There's some things the Western world can learn from us. Like, it's not always us trying to learn from them. There's actually things that they can learn from our culture, things that they can learn from our lifestyle that would be beneficial to some of the problems that we're having right now.
100%. 100%. Like, you think about resourcefulness, you think about like creativity. There's so many things that the West, or whatever, the global North, I always think of it from the perspective of folks in the United States. Like, I think that we just have so much to learn. But yeah, it's like I just did a recent episode with Angel Chang, and she's a designer and she works with communities in China in like small mountain villages. And it's the Miao, they make the Miao people, and they make like traditional garments, and they make their fabric. So she works with them, and basically they literally use only what's in the backyard to make the garments.
Wow.
They grow the cotton, they dye it with indigo that they have there that they grow. They cut and sew it there, and they don't use any electricity. They use like sun and water from rain, right? and their hands. And it's like literally like the real deal, zero carbon fashion. And I think on that show, we brought up like there's this obsession that we have in the United States with this idea of like technology and like the future and how all of the solutions have to be these tech-driven solutions.
Right.
When really, if we would just slow down and listen, we would realize and discover that there are so many solutions existing already within Indigenous communities, within communities across the global South that have ways of using what's around them in a very thoughtful way, because it's just the way that culture has been and the way that people are doing life. And like, we don't need to obsess about like the next big thing all the time. We could also just slow down and listen.
Yeah, very true. I really enjoyed this conversation, but we need to wrap up. We could go on and on.
We could go on and on.
I know. So to wrap up, do you have any exciting personal projects to share, or maybe some news, some big change that is happening in the sustainable fashion world?
Sure. So I guess one exciting thing is I started a podcast with Brittany of Sustainable Fashion Forum at the end of last year. We released one episode. The show is called Third Degree, and we just recorded another show. So another will be dropping soon. It's basically, we would just get on the phone and have conversations, and we decided to start recording them. So
that's cool.
So we both work in the space, have been working in the space for quite a while, and have all these ideas, and we talk to people all the time. And so we just kind of go back and forth and are very transparent that we don't have all of the solutions or all the information, but just try to present different things on our mind. And we welcome the audience to kind of submit their questions or submit their thoughts to add to the conversation so we can bring it up the next week. So
that's really awesome. That's something like what me and my friend decided to do with the podcast. So instead of, because we were really focused on just interviewing people before, and then we decided, why don't have conversations between ourselves about our imperfect sustainable lifestyle and some of the issues that we're facing. And we also think about inviting friends that are not necessarily in the environmental science or sustainability, that are not actively pursuing careers in that space, to find out what their perspective is about some of the issues that we talk about. That's really
I love
awesome.
that too. I love that.
Thank you. And you said the name of the podcast is Third Degree?
Third Degree.
Cool. I'll check it out.
Yeah, but otherwise, I think there's so much happening in this space right now. It can be overwhelming. So just if you're interested in it, take it one step at a time. And we all feel overwhelmed, even if we have been in this space for like 15 years, we feel overwhelmed. So take it one step at a time and find people around you that are excited about it as well, that you can chat with and kind of feel like you're in community with.
Yeah. And I think it's also important to just start from one place instead of trying to go all in at once, because then you can get overwhelmed, even scarred, and not want to do anything. So really just finding what brings you joy first, and then or what's your strongest point, and address it, try to just go towards that line. So yeah, thank you very much, Kestrel, for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Tosin. It's so fun chatting with you.
Same here.
Thanks so much for listening to the Sustainability Nuggets podcast. I am Rarsu Maribi.
And I am Tosin Falarunsho. If you enjoyed this podcast, please leave a rating and review on wherever you listen to your podcast.
You can also show your support by signing up for a small donation to help sustain future episodes. You can find all relevant links in the description. See you in our next episode.